Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live again for you. I've been posting a bunch of videos lately, and I've been in the habit of post, or I should say, record. I've been recording a bunch of videos at a time, and then kind of gradually setting them up, getting them ready, making them all pretty and stuff, and then I've been mostly like, trying to set them as premieres to try to like break up things a little bit, bring in variety of different, of different movies and things. It was pretty funny. One gentleman that's been really cool that has been commenting a lot on these videos. He was like, "Hey, when are you going to get back to doing shows on all of the weird exploitation movies?" And it was funny because, like, again, and I said, "Yeah, it's coming back. It's never going away." But it was just funny because, like, that's the thing. Like, that's my bread and butter. That's my safe space, if you will. Is that world of horror and exploitation? But again, it's like I love all kinds of movies, so I've been covering um, lots of different things lately. I've just been in a place like why I covered all of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, and I try to bring a lot of variety. I always go back to that source of the world of exploitation as my and horror being my favorite. But I love to bring variety to channels sometimes, and it's not necessarily a criticism, but sometimes like, and I really appreciate people like commenting, and making funny comments like that. But for me, like one thing that happens for me, and it's not necessarily a criticism. I mean, it could be looked at as a criticism, but I love. There's about three or four YouTube guys out there that I really love, that I watch pretty regularly, and one thing I find, and I know it's about a niche or getting that algorithm locked in where you're gonna reach your quote unquote target audience. But there's like if I want to watch a show on say all of my where one guy or girl will be talking about all the sleazy exploitation movies that I cherish, and those are my favorite. I'll go to that, and then I'll want to watch, say, another show where it's going to be, or another channel where it's more on just kind of contemporary horror films that are coming out. And then maybe I'll watch another channel where it will be just, a little bit of everything, but some of the films tend to be more Hollywood based kinds of films, movies that get the quote unquote Oscar buzz. And I find myself, I have to like go to different channels or different sources for that. And I get that. I get like you want to get a thing catered to a certain audience and all those things. But for me, I like the variety, and it'd be cool to see a channel. That's one thing I really love about this channel, without like tooting my own horn too hard, is that I feel like all of those different things, like on my own time, I have to go to different channels to get that variety. But I think that this channel is pretty cool with having a little bit of all of those things in one place. So that's one thing I take a lot of pride in. It's definitely focused on those, on that genre, my favorite genre of all time. But again, I love all kinds of things, so I love to try to bring in all of those things. And the it's a cliche thing, but to say, but I think it's really, really true. Variety is the spice of life. So that's one thing I pride myself with, which I think is a really good aspect of this channel, is that there is there's more variety, I think, within this channel than there is a lot of other channels. Um, but I understand that can be, for me, from a marketing standpoint, or like getting that algorithm or that target audience, that can act as a crutch. But it is what it is. So today's show might be a long show. This is going to be an interesting show. I'm going to be talking about, yesterday, of course, was Thanksgiving. Just now slept in late today and recovering from eating an insane amount of food and drinking a pretty good amount of alcohol and watching a ton of movies. It was. pretty epic day as far as those things go. I went to my folks for Thanksgiving, like I do all the time. We always have pretty mellow Thanksgivings. Last year, my brother and his wife Patty came up, and when I was a kid, I grew up in New York. When I was a kid, we always had, most of my family still lives in New York, and when growing up, through my teens and things, before I went to college, or even during college, my early 20s or so, we always had massive Thanksgivings and holidays, like, 25 people, and, the big to do gatherings. But ever since my folks moved up here to Maine, and then I eventually moved up here also, we generally have like really mellow Thanksgivings and holidays. It's on average it's just the three of us, and occasionally I'll have like there'll be other, a few other people, but generally it's just the three of us, and so it's very mellow. And I don't know, I love the big kind of gatherings, but I love the more mellow kind of things. As I've gotten older. But we always, we eat like, millions of other families. We eat, eat a lot of food, and it's always great. And then one thing that we always do as part of our tradition is we watch a ton of movies. And yesterday we watched four movies, which was pretty intense. I was kind of tapped between eating, turkey, and we had a big, the big meal at about 4:30, and then dessert, and then later on that night we made turkey sandwiches. And but we usually do the big movie marathon thing on the holidays. So today's show is going to be all about that. And then it was really nice because about 6 o'clock or so last night we actually got some snow, and it snowed here in the mid coast Maine. It snowed. We got about 2-3 inches, and it was nice. It was sticking, and it's still on the ground right now. So it was actually really pretty, and it was nice. So it added a little bit of that. Now we're moving into the Christmas season, so it moved into that kind of vibes, which I really love. So, and I feel like usually for Christmas I don't get into the holiday spirit, if you will, until like a week or 2 weeks before Christmas. But I've been kind of feeling it a little bit more, which doesn't usually happen. And I was like, made a comment to my mom last night that you know what, I'm thinking I'm gonna do a little bit more for Christmas as far as like decorating and doing different things for it. Because usually, I'll put up a little tree, I'll put up some lights, and I kind of do a small little thing here at the house. But it's generally pretty low key, and I kind of had this feeling of like doing a little bit more in regards to that. But we'll see. So today's show is going to be on all of the movies that we watched today. I thought about dividing up all of these videos, dividing up coverage of the four movies that we watched and making separate videos. But then I thought, well, now I'll just do one. I'll do one big video and see how it goes, and just talk about each of these movies. Starting off, the main thing was I have to say the movies that we watched. I had a great time, and it was fun, and I'll pretty much give anything a spin. I'll watch. I'll give anything a chance as far as watching it, whether it's something I'm really looking forward to or something I don't know anything about. I'm pretty open minded that way. But generally, the movies that we watched were not very good. They were all kind of terrible. But it was just a funny course of the evening because it was like 6 or 7 hours of movies, which isn't too much of a stretch for me. I mean, that's 4 hours. Four movies in one sitting is a lot, but for me, it's usually like a movie a night, and then Sundays, sometimes Saturdays, but Sundays is usually a day where I'll watch 2 or 3 movies sometimes. Um, but anyway, so the first movie I want to talk about is a movie that I'd heard about, and it's called. I got all of these movies at, of course, Opera House Video, world famous Opera House Video, which is the only video store in the entire state where you can rent movies, rent TV shows, and buy movies. And of course, owned by Dennis Howard, good friend of mine. He's been keeping that place alive for a long time. So the first movie I want to talk about is this kind of newer slasher movie. It came out It came out this year, and it stars Justin Long, and I like Justin Long. He's been in a lot of movies, over the years. I have not seen him in anything recently, but recently I did a coverage, a video on one of my favorite horror films, like in the more modern age, Jeepers Creepers, and he was the star of that movie, and I really really love that movie. I recently did a show on that, and so I came across this movie like, oh, and Justin Long is the lead in this film, and so I was kind of excited to see it. But the thing is it's billed. It's called It's a Wonderful Knife, and this is just the DVD copy. I got all of these movies are DVDs, and this movie is It's a Wonderful Knife. Obviously, it's a play on It's a Wonderful Life. And when I brought these movies over, my mom looked at the cover and she thought, "Oh, that's nice. You brought over It's a Wonderful Life." But it's like, no, It's a Wonderful Knife, and it was really funny because actually this is like a kind of a modern take of that story, but now this movie is a slasher. It's a slasher movie. So slashers are my all time favorite genre, period, and especially in the world of horror and exploitation. Give me a good slasher, and I'm happier than a pig in shit. So It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Knife. See, I'm saying it. I this came out. I think this came out over the summer of this year, 2024, and it's definitely a Christmas movie. It totally is. It takes place at Christmas Eve, Christmas Day in this small town, and it's all, you know, steeped in the Christmas aesthetic and the Christmas world. And so, but I have this funny thing, like I can't really watch Christmas themed movies outside of the holiday season. So I decided to wait, and I didn't see this. And I heard from a couple of different sources that this movie was actually really good. And again, I love slasher. Give me a good slasher, and that's the best thing I can watch. That for me is the most enjoyable genre, my favorite genre. And I like Justin Long, and I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like there are some really good slasher or horror based Christmas films, and probably the best one being Black Sunday, obviously. But so I didn't rent it. I'm gonna wait because it's not Christmas or Christmas season. So I waited, and I figured, okay, it's Thanksgiving. This will be a good movie to watch because we're ushering in Christmas now, and I feel right now it's officially Christmas season, like it just started. So I got it, and we rented it, and we watched it last night. And this movie, I don't know, I kind of felt at the end of this whole movie experience, it was like, I don't know, the best way I can describe it is I felt like it was kind of a teeny bopper slasher movie. It had, the masked killer in this film was pretty good. The design of the killer, the masked killer, which of course is your kind of your key ingredient in the slasher movie. I always feel like for a slasher movie to be good, or at least for it to be really, have some good. One of the things I look for the most for a good slasher film is like a good design around the killer, the person who is the slasher. Where they wear, they have this really imposing vibe about them. They are generally intimidating and scary, and typically for a lot of slasher films, it's about the mass killer. And I love if there's a lot of thought and care put into that, and love put into that. And I thought the actual character design with the mask and the kind of the theme and the aesthetic around the killer was actually really cool. I kind of dug it. And first half of the movie, there are some good kills, and I thought, okay, of course, that's the other thing. There has to be, for a good slasher movie, there has to be a series of really good kills that will go there, and it's satisfying and it's fun. And then you have you're a group of helpless teenagers that get picked off one by one. You know, those are the things you're looking for, that I'm looking for first and foremost. And if there happens to be something, because a lot of slasher films are kind of the same, but you do get certain films in the genre that are have something really unique about them. Like my all-time favorite slasher film, Maniac. And then you look at a movie like My Bloody Valentine, the original, which is another masterpiece. The template is kind of the same, more or less, but the films have something so unique to say within the genre, and they are highly, highly creative within that genre. And I feel like, it's at the end of the day, for me, it's not just a carbon copy of each other. I feel like they all have their own personality. Another film I think that does that incredibly well is The Burning, another amazing slasher film. All those movies have a really unique feel about them. And I felt like, okay, this movie started off pretty good. It's a Wonderful Knife. It had some pretty good kills. I like the design of the killer. And it's a play on the It's a Wonderful Life of where, what if you're able to, travel back to time, to a different time, or, what would life be without those situations? And it's, the tone of the film was very much a slasher film. And then it felt like, the movie felt like it switched into 90s mode. Like it felt like a slasher movie that could have come out in the 90s. Like I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like it had that feel. And there were some good slasher films, I guess, that came out in the 90s. But I don't. But in all honesty, I don't really like a lot of the horror slasher films that came out in the 90s, with, like, say, the exception of Scream, which I think is the first Scream, I think, is a really, really good movie. But outside of that, there aren't too many slasher films that came out during that period that I particularly like. Mainly because I feel like everything is really glossy. I feel like the dialogue is extra. It's got this extra level of where it feels really generic. The cast and all of the characters are just a little bit too pretty. It's got this kind of glossy look to it, the whole kind of world, like in a lot of those 90s films. And it just takes on this, like, silly, goofy, teeny bopper vibe. Like, it's not really. I love slasher films of where, yeah, I love to see, a lot of slasher films are known for there being gratuitous sex in them, and things, and of course that's one of the things I love about them. Um, but those classic slasher films always have a little bit of grittiness to them, and a sense of humor, and it's not, they're a little bit nasty, they're a little bit rough, and I felt like that's one of the things I don't like about a lot of 90s slasher movies is they're just a little bit too sanitized, a little bit too, everything's a little too pretty. It's not, for me, it's not raw enough. It's not I don't think of a film, and the same thing with this movie in particular, which I'm talking about. It's a Wonderful Knife. It feels like it's a little too, like, sanitized and a little bit too. Um, I like my films in that genre to be a little bit more low down and dirty. And again, it's not a bad movie. It's not bad, but it's okay. Justin Long is good in it. He's pretty funny. There is some comedy in this film. Um, but ultimately, I was like wanting to see more kills. I was excited to see more of those things. There is the problem with, there is a big cast in this film, and a lot of the cast, I feel, and the actors are just kind of on screen for the sake of being on screen. It's not really that exciting. I'm not really invested in the characters, and it just feels like a '90s leftover, a movie that came out in the '90s, in the slasher genre. It's okay. It's not terrible, but it's not really my jam. It's not what I look for when I want to watch a really good slasher film. doesn't have that. It's not rough. It's not rough around the edges. Around the edges, it's not really. It's too clean for me, if that makes any sense. And it just has, like I said, I use that word teeny bopper. It just feels like it's, like this would be a movie for middle school, high school kids, in that genre, you know. So it's okay. I don't really recommend it. I mean, it's all right. It's not terrible, but I don't. There's a plethora. There's a lot more. I think there's a handful of fantastic movies that have come out. If you're looking for a really good slasher film that does something really unique but really delivers the goods as far as a slasher movie, I can't. I really love In a Violent Nature. Really unique slasher film, but really good, and it delivers the goods. Like it's got all those great tropes. It's kind of raw. It's kind of nasty, but it does do something really unique. And so that movie I think is a really good newer slasher film, like really good. That's one of my favorite films of this year. But It's a Wonderful Knife, it's all right. And again, these are all DVDs that I got. And next up, again, I've talked a lot about my huge, deep love for Nicolas Cage. He's like pretty much my favorite male actor around, and so I got this other movie, this newer film that also just came out, Arcadian, starring Nicolas Cage, and it just came out, I think a couple weeks ago. And this also, most of these films, well, at least these first two or three, I had heard about. And this film, I was probably the most excited to see, Arcadian. This is a movie, I believe it came out the summertime. I don't think it was in theaters around here, but I know it just came out on DVD. And it stars Nicolas Cage. And I pretty much try to see everything with Nicolas Cage. He is an actor where I feel like, he can be in a pretty terrible or pretty bad movie, but still, like, he always, I feel like Nicolas Cage always dials it in, and he's always great, even if it's like not a great film. And I feel like with this film, again, that's kind of the case. Um, I had heard about this film a few times online. A couple of people that I watch on YouTube had talked about this movie. They were also very highly critical of this film, and I totally agree with those criticisms, and I'll be getting into those in a second. But I was still looking forward to seeing this movie because I love Nicolas Cage, and the premise of this movie sounded like it's kind of interesting. Um, so I watched this. We watched this, I think, second last night. It's funny. This is actually the order of how we watch these films. And we watched Arcadian last night. And again, it's a pretty solid movie. Um, but ultimately, I didn't really like this movie really that much at all. It really dragged. I felt exhausted at the end of it. The thing that I thought the most, the aspect of this movie that I did not like is how um, unoriginal this movie is. This movie is literally a carbon copy of A Quiet Place. Like it's literally the same movie, and it's so obvious. And I was like, man, I wish this was something. I wish they could have explored that idea. Kind of the end of the world scenario where a film essentially about alien invasion and what do the survivors do at the end. That's a theme we've seen in many, many, many movies over the years, but they could have done it something. They could have done something different. A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place 2, those movies are just awesome. I mean, I love those movies, and I think that those movies really have a level of intensity to them and originality that is above the rest. And in that, especially in that sci-fi horror genre. And this movie, I felt like Arcadian just literally rips off the first Quiet Place, like just everything. The entire scenario is the same, where you have these isolated characters Nicholas Cage and and his two sons are basically isolated, in this really rural place. They're basically stuck at this farm. You get this sense that the world around them has kind of ended. They are kind of like the lone survivors, and if they're out at dark at a particular time, they are, there are these monsters or these aliens that come out at night to try to kill them, and it's basically them being having to, turn their house of where they're living, this giant farmhouse, and to fortifying it, making it uh, so nothing can penetrate it or get inside, and it's about them surviving and how they try to live more or less as a family under those circumstances, and the risks that they have to that they have to deal with. So it's like literally a quiet place. And I was like, I was really to me it was so obvious, and it was so blatant, like such a blatant ripoff. There was no I it was hard to get into this movie. The thing too, like the aspects I did like about this movie is I thought Nicolas Cage was great in it. He plays a different role. I like the family dynamic with him and his sons. There are some really good scenes of them, like basically having dinner together and talking about, surviving and manhood and all of these things, um, and how to deal with this, these insurmountable odds that they're facing, daily. And it is, there's some good acting in this. Um, there are some very well done acting scenes, or there is some good writing. There's some good characters in this film that I thought were interesting and engaging. I did care about some of these characters quite a bit, but as a whole, the whole movie to me, it was just it was too much of a ripoff of A Quiet Place. And the thing that I did not like is when they introduce, there's like one scene of where they slowly introduce these alien creatures, which is really really cool, really actually scary, actually generally pretty scary and frightening. But when they get into showing the creatures, it's literally again a carbon copy of the creature design of A Quiet Place, like literally. And it was just like, oh come on, this movie is so fucking unoriginal, like, and it was so obvious. And the other thing that I did not like about this movie is the way this film is shot is so terrible. It's so annoying because every scene, there are some scenes of where you can kind of see what's going on in the frame, but about 80% or 90% of this film, it's all done in this like shaky cam mode. So the camera is like constantly shaking, and it's so disorienting, and you can't. A lot of the times, there's a lot of scenes in this movie where it takes place at night. Almost the majority of these scenes take place at night, and and it's literally uh, impossible to see anything. Like I couldn't make out what is going on in any of the scenes because the camera is jumping around so much, and it's so jittery. And it's like I can't. It comes down to the point of where I just can't see what's going on. I have no idea what's going on. I can get a sense of what's happening, but I can't see anything because it's all like, it's so disorienting the way, and so the whole film is that way, and it's so like there's to me it's just not enjoyable, and you can't, and plus you can't see, you literally can't see what's going on between these characters when the monsters are you know about to attack them, or they are being attacked in these various spots. And it was, yeah, it's shot really, the cinematography, the way they approach this film to do that, to make that decision to shoot that way, I just feel it was ultimately all awful. And I know they're probably going for this, like, kind of quote unquote gritty realism, or like a little bit of a found footage thing, but it doesn't work for this film because you literally can't see what is transpiring. If this was a found footage film, sure, that can work. I mean, that works. Like, or a film that has found footage aspects, like make Lake Mungo, which is a masterpiece. This Australian film that I just recently got into, just an amazing movie. That's not a found footage film, but they do have aspects of that in the movie, and the way they use it, it's so effective and so creepy and scary, and it makes sense. And of course, the iconic The Blair Witch Project. That really did kick off the found footage genre, and in that world, it totally works because it really tells the story, shows the true kind of the terrifying nature of what these people were experiencing. So in that context, it works. But in a regular kind of full length feature film, it just doesn't work. It totally impedes on the experience. And I ultimately, like, again, this movie wasn't absolutely terrible. It wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen. But I ultimately was really disappointed with this movie because of those things. And I was looking out of the movies that I rented. This was the movie I was looking forward to the most. Um, and my folks and I, we kind of agree on films, for the most part. But they also felt that more or less we kind of came to the same agreement about this film, and also It's a Wonderful Knife. But maybe, I don't know. I'd say it's hard to say. I think I might have enjoyed It's a Wonderful Knife a little bit more. But ultimately, Arcadian I thought was pretty disappointing. Yeah, I wouldn't really recommend it. There's far better films out there to check out, especially when it comes to like newer films. And the next up was a another movie that I had heard about from a couple of different sources. It is I think it's a Netflix original. Just came out late. I think it came out in like August or September of this year. And there was a couple of I did see a couple reviews for this film, and they were pretty mixed. Some were like okay, pretty decent. Others were not very good. But again, sometimes it's a dilemma to like find when I go to rent movies, sometimes it's a dilemma to find like good quality movies because there's so many movies that come out every month. And I even made this comment last night that like to my mom, like, you know, I think we're inundated more with like social media or entertainment, things like all of the TV shows that are out there, all of the movies that are theatrically getting put out by studios. But then now you have all of these films that are being put out by all of these streaming companies. So I think now, as a viewer and as a person who loves this kind of content, we're more inundated and at a more kind of overwhelming level than any other time. I think in the entertainment business. So there's so much stuff that's coming out. But I was saying that like with the sheer amount of stuff that's coming out, it just feels like everything is so. The majority of a lot of these films and television shows and what have you are just like really bland. Like they're just kind of there. They're not necessarily terrible. They're not necessarily great. They just kind of exist, and it's like just content for like content's sake. And some of them are really terrible, but like I feel like just so many of these things are just lacking any kind of spirit or originality, and they're just kind of put out. And this movie is definitely an example. So this movie just again came out very recently. It's Apartment 7A. And this movie is a prequel to, one of my all-time favorite movies, Rosemary's Baby, directed by Roman Polanski, Mia Farrow, and John Cassavetes. One of the most iconic and one of one of the most influential horror films I think ever made. It's one of my all time favorites. It's definitely in my top list. Um, so unfortunately, I was not excited by the prospect of them doing a prequel of this classic story. But that's what it is, and here we go. So again, I kind of rented this movie, well, kind of out of desperation because I wanted to get a bunch of movies that had some variety. And again, I like to see and keep, you know, keep my finger on the pulse of new films that are coming out. And this, I was surprised, came out so quickly on DVD, and I got this movie. And this movie, we watched this last night late. This was the last movie I think we watched. Um, and this movie is absolutely an atrocity. This is probably one of the worst movies I have seen in recent time. Um, just so bland, so generic, so dumb. No, zero creativity, so generic, so predictable. I mean, it's like if USA, the US, well, they don't exist anymore, but like back when I was a kid, there were, you had NBC, CBS, and all, and Fox and HBO, and then there was USA. USA was another network that was like a really kind of bottom of the barrel TV network. And they would have, they'd have movies that were syndicated, but they were one of the first networks, TV networks that I remember at that time when I was a kid that would make original movies. And then eventually, HBO started doing it, and they still, I think, remain the kings of original content. But back then, HBO, USA would make these original movies, and they were atrocious. They were like almost kind of like Lifetime network TV shows. They were just the most generic, the cheesiest garbage you can imagine. And this film feels like it was made by, the late 80s, early 90s era of the USA network. It's so bad. It's like, and it's to me, it's like this movie is kind of an insult to any person with like 5% a 5% level of intelligence. Like there's like zero atmosphere for this movie. It is so they take every possible cliche and trope that you would think that you've seen in a horror film, and they put that in every scene in this movie, every aspect of this movie. It's so generic. It's like literally, you can walk out of the room, you could go to the bathroom, close your eyes, take a nap, come back, and you're not going to miss anything. It's so like laid out. Everything is so laid out for the person. There's like zero suspense. Um, they try so hard to like try to make, they this is a prequel to such a classic, and oh god, this movie is awful. It was painful, and my parents liked this film. My dad liked this film, and I'm just like, what are you thinking? Like, really? Oh, it's terrible. Like, it's an atrocity. Um, definitely, definitely one of the worst movies I've ever seen, and it's an example of why I hate so many films that come out these days. All of these damn prequels and reimaginings and sequels, and it's like, why can't I mean, even with, well, any of these movies I talk about, but especially Arcadian, it's like, what the fuck? Why can't where are all of the what happened to creativity? What happened to originality? And it doesn't have to be like, I'm not asking for something that is, groundbreaking. Sure, that's great if that comes along, but something original. And I'm like, this is an example of like kind of the time that we're living in, of like just these rehashed garbage. This is like rehashed shit that's like made into like the same sandwich every year, and you're being forced to eat it because that's your only option. And I'm like, oh my god, yeah, this movie, I definitely say stay away. Do not waste your time. I this movie was painful to watch, and it dragged ass like it. I don't know the actual. Yeah, I don't understand. I don't really know, nor do I care. But I don't know the exact runtime for this film, but it felt like eternity. It's probably an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. It's probably less than 2 hours, but it felt like it was 5 hours. Like it just drags ass. It's so slow and so ridiculous. And then when you kind of get into the aspect of the story or the horror aspect of or the supernatural aspect of the movie, it's just so like it's so goddamn cheesy. And it literally takes these scenes that were used in Rosemary's Baby and tries to like reimagine it and bring it back, and it's so bad. And it's like you got to be kidding me. Like what were these people thinking to make this movie? I mean, it's clearly a cash grab because I think they a few years ago they made a television show out of Rosemary's Baby, and I heard that was just terrible. This movie is just a piece of garbage that should be burnt at the stake. Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. Painful. So this brings me to the last movie of today that we watched, and this movie I actually think overall pound for pound was the most interesting movie that I watched. That we watched, but the thing was, is my folks did not like this movie at all, so I ended up taking it out, and we ended up having to watch Apartment 7A, the Rosemary's Baby prequel. Unfortunately, but this movie, Columbus, is well, the thing I liked about it. Well, it's not a horror film, and it is so it's world apart different from any of these movies that we've watched because so far all of these movies have been horror movies, not very good ones. And but this movie was kind of interesting. It's a drama. It's a little bit mysterious, and it's a character study. It's super uber slow, but the thing that I liked about this film so far, it's called Columbus, and I believe it came out this year. Um, it just came out, I believe, this year. I, from when I saw this movie, I actually thought this movie was cool because the cinematography for this movie, the some of the music, the acting, some of the characters were really great and engaging, and it's an interesting story. It's about this girl um, who works at this bookstore, and she is applying to go to for this relatively like prestigious teaching job that she's trying to get into. She's also very much um, well versed and has a real big attraction to architecture, and she's going to see a speaker of this man who is a professor, and he is like I guess regarded as one of the leading figures in modern architecture. And she's going to go to this talk at this university to meet to see this guy give this talk. And but something happens to the guy where he basically has before the conference he has a brain aneurysm, and he goes into a coma. So of course the event gets canceled, and there's a little bit of a tragedy around that. And she somehow ends up running into the son of this professor, and they strike up this kind of interesting and slightly odd or off kilter relationship. And that's like what I've gotten so far from this movie, and it's very interesting and super slow, super slow. There's not a whole lot of dialogue. When there is, I thought the writing was really great. The cinematography for this movie is really cool. The music was really great. It's kind of a somber film, a very quiet film. Feels like very much feels like a foreign film, but very cool. But we did not finish watching it, and I kind of want to finish it, but we'll see what happens. But ironically, this was the movie I thought was the most original and the most enjoyable. And the other films that I described or that I talked about that we watched, those films were I felt were all physically exhausting. By the end of each of those movies and during watching those films, especially the atrocious piece of shit Apartment 7A. Those films were just exhausting. Like I felt tired. I felt like I was running a marathon and trying to keep up because they just felt exhausting. And when started watching Columbus, I felt like, oh, okay, I can kind of get into this. I was like kind of into it, and I felt like I loved this pacing. It was such a nice, relaxing pace compared to this garbage that I was watching. Where it's like too much stimulation and just all of this noise, not enough, but no meat to it. But this film was really cool because it had the space and I was absorbed. But unfortunately, we didn't finish watching it, so I might have to rent it again. But we'll see. So overall, a pretty bad film experience. Thanksgiving itself was still awesome, but the movies that we watched and watched for about 4 hours, including another movie that I haven't uploaded yet. I did the show a while back, or actually a few days ago, and that was on this movie Cuckoo, which I had on Blu-ray. My parents do not have a Blu-ray player, so I watched it here. That movie was a total disappointment as well. So had a great holiday, but definitely saw some pretty shitty movies. Yeah. So that wraps up this long and winded show of covering 4 movies in one. So thanks again, and we will see you soon. Peace.